nominal.
Alright, the chamber pressure looks good.
Doubling up. Roger roll, Atlantis.
Water towers can fly! Yes!
Tango down to nominal.
Flight down speed off. Bring in, speed off. Off.
Yikes. You bet.
Concur.
We don't need any more of these.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of NASASpaceflight Live, the weekly news show where we just blabber on about cool space stuff because it's fun to do. My name is Thomas Burghardt, news director for NASASpaceflight, and today we are joined by a very special guest, Mr. Scott Kid Poteet, the pilot of the upcoming Polaris Dawn mission, here to talk all about the Polaris program. Kid, how you doing? Thanks for joining us.
I'm surviving, yeah. We're super excited to talk about Polaris Dawn and all things space. I mean, how could you not get pumped up with that intro?
Yeah, we're big fans of it here. Glad you liked it. We also got Mr. Chris Gebhardt, Assistant Managing Editor for NASASpaceflight, joining us. Chris, thanks for joining us as well.
Would not have missed this conversation for anything.
All right. And of course, as usual, we're going to be taking some live questions from chat as well. We've got some stuff to talk with Kid about leading up to Inspiration4 and then, of course, Polaris. But if you have questions you'd like to ask him, please go ahead and tag us with @NASASpaceflight in chat. And I'm going to be pulling those throughout the course of the broadcast as well so that we can ask him your questions too. Also, I do want to give a preemptive big thank you to anyone who sent support our way with super chats and things like that. We're not going to be acknowledging those directly today because we want to focus all of our time to talk with Kid about Polaris and things like that. But a big thank you to everyone's support on that front. So without further ado, I think we should get started, and we should start, Kid, with your background all the way at the beginning of the story, because your background is as a pilot for the U.S. Air Force, which has led to all sorts of cool things down the line. What led you to kind of start down that career path?
That's a great question. So, I'm definitely dating myself. I'm 48, so that passion for aviation started pretty young. I grew up in the 80s. Big fan of Top Gun, The Right Stuff, when those movies came out. In fact, I think I still own the double VHS Right Stuff copy. But that passion started pretty early on. I worked at an airport, FBO, pumping gas, just out of high school. And once I got to college, I grew up in New Hampshire, along the seacoast, a town called Durham, New Hampshire. University of New Hampshire is there. So once I got to college, I had the opportunity to jump in the back of a KC-135.
Oh, wow.
And for those who are unfamiliar, that's the Air Force tanker. There's air-to-air refueling, and there was a base there called Pease Air Force Base. It's a long time since closed. I got in the back seat, and I had an opportunity to go refuel some F-16s. One of the challenges that I have been faced with in the beginning of my Air Force career is air sickness. So I had a huge bout of air sickness during that mission, but it was enough to provide a spark and passion and drive that I was not going to let go of. I got to climb in the back where the boom is, where they stick the probe, and the F-16 pulls up and gets refueled. And just witnessing that for a couple seconds was enough of a spark to go, I want to do that. I want to be in that cockpit and I want to fly. So once I got down, I immediately signed up TC and did 4 years of that. Was lucky enough to get a pilot slot. And then from there, I went on to pilot training after graduating in 1996. As far as my Air Force career, I started off pilot training in Shepherd Air Force Base, which is in Wichita Falls, Texas. It's a program called Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training. It's a collaboration with NATO countries that teach their young officers how to fly. You pretty much spend about a year, a little over a year, learning how to fly. They teach you the basics, from instrument flying all the way up to some tactical formation. Back in my day, it was a T-37 Tweet, twin engine jet, and then you do that for about 6 months. And based on how you perform in your pilot training class, you move on to either a T-38, which is a sleek little jet that NASA still flies to this day, highly maneuverable. So I went on to that, flew that for 6 months, and then based on my performance out of that pilot training class, I selected F-16s and then went on to fly F-16s at Luke Air Force Base in Phoenix, Arizona. That's another 6-month program. Based on that experience, you now transition to your first operational base. And quickly, we can dive into who you want, but my sequence of operational bases started off in Osan, Korea, where I flew for the 36th Fighter Squadron. Did that for a year, went to Aviano at the end of the Kosovo conflict, flew there for 3 years, and then went on to the Fighter Weapons School, which is the Air Force version of Top Gun. It's a 6-month program, more or less get your PhD in tactical flying in your specific aircraft, and you learn all about all the other aircraft in the Air Force inventory as well. From there, went back to Luke, where the schoolhouse is, where you teach guys how to fly the F-16. Did that for 3 years before heading up to Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas, where I spent most of my career. My first stop at Nellis Air Force Base was the 422 Test and Evaluation Squadron. That is your operational test and evaluation unit. So there's more or less 2 types of testing that the Air Force will do. There's the developmental test, if you're familiar with all the test pilots that go through that year-long schooling, highly educated in all things aerodynamic, basic operations with engines and airframes. In fact, one of our guys on our team, Leif Erickson, is a TPS grad, and a heck of a lot smarter than any of us based on that education. But there's another element of testing called operational test. That's where we test software upgrades, some smaller hardware development, some new weapons, software for weapons, and then we try to apply tactics based on the capabilities that those systems bring to the fight. I only did that for about a year and a half before I got selected for the Air Force Thunderbirds. Went on to represent the Air Force for 2.5 years. This is back in 2007 and 8. And I flew as the slot pilot, which is number 4. You got the boss out front, commander leader, and then 2 and 3 are in left and right wing, and then 4 is underneath the boss in the slot position. And then you have solos 5 and 6, opposing and lead. That was a heck of a ride doing that for 2 years. And then from there, I actually took my first non-flying assignment here at the Air Force Academy. I live in Monument, Colorado. So I commanded a cadet squadron here for about a year. Got my master's in leadership and counseling, and then I got picked up to command. So I actually went back to Nellis, where the aggressors are located, 64th Aggressor Squadron, and the primary role of that unit is to replicate the threat. So your dedicated job is to take the tactics of our enemies or hypothetical enemies, train to what they do, and then use those assets, F-16s in my case, to help train mainly the Air Force Weapons School, which is located there at Nellis, and that's what I had done previously. You also provide the adversary support for red flag exercises, which are big coalition exercises, start in the early 70s, and then still doing it today, where you'll have hundreds of aircrafts in the sky, you know, good guys, bad guys, and we lead the bad packages and help those guys train. I did that for about 2.5 years, and then I went back to Aviano Air Base, where I spent my last 3 years of my Air Force career, retiring in 2016.
All right, well, there you have it. A big, long Air Force career with a lot of cool stories in there. I want to back through and piece through some of this. So
Yeah.
a whole lot of that was on the F-16. I mean, how many hours are you up to in that airframe alone at this point?
You know, I just have just over 3,000. It's a smaller aircraft, so less fuel. So you don't necessarily get the sortie durations that you would get in a heavy C-17, C-5, C-130. So the average sortie durations anywhere from a 1.0 hour out to, you know, if you're doing some air-to-air refueling that we did, you know, for example, in Afghanistan, it's about a 4 to 5 hour sortie. But I'd say the longest I've ever been in the F-16 is about 13. It was a 13.1 hour sortie, and that was from Omaha, Nebraska, and we flew up towards Alaska and then down back to Korea, because we were doing a deployment to shoot missiles down at WESP, which is where you test air-to-air missiles down at Tyndall Air Force Base, probably close to you guys,
Yep.
out there in the Panhandle.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I would say about 3,000 hours to answer the question, and then I have a smattering of some additional time in the trainers that we flew in, and then thanks to Jared's fleet, I've been getting some time in the Alpha Jet, and hopefully I'll upgrade in MiG-29 and the L-39 soon.
Yeah, we're definitely going to talk a whole lot about Draken and the flyovers involved with Inspiration4 and Polaris, of course. Let's talk about the Thunderbirds a little bit. How were you selected to become a Thunderbird? How does that process go about?
So that selection process, it's fairly lengthy. You got to submit your resume, your performance reports, picture, recommendation letters that you typically get from alumni or senior leadership. I believe those submissions usually happen. The typical season is somewhere between March and November. And then off season, you're doing a lot of training and some cool events like flying over certain stadiums that you guys are experiencing right now with the Daytona 500.
Yep.
We literally heard Afterburners like 5 minutes before the stream started, everyone. So the Thunderbirds are actually in town for us.
Sound of freedom. You got to love it. We actually hear it quite a bit here with the Air Force Academy, because anyone who's a grad who flies for the Air Force wants to come back and fly over the terrazzo, which is the courtyard in the middle of the Air Force Academy. So you'll see, in fact, my view right here, right, the front range runs north to south, and we'll see fighter jets every once in a while. So it's pretty cool. But as far as back to the selection process, you submit in January, and then you go through a fairly comprehensive interview process. If you make the cut down to the semifinalists, you shadow the team on a actual air show in the beginning of the season, March timeframe, and then eventually, if you make the cut down to finalists, you get notified in June. You prep for the move. You physically have to move depending on where you're stationed. For me, I was already stationed at Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas, so it was an easy transition. And then as soon as the season's done for that team, you start training. In fact, immediately, it was like 2 or 3 days after their last show, which is Las Vegas at Nellis, you start your training. In fact, the training season is more demanding than actual show season, because sometimes you're flying twice a day, 3 times a day. The syllabus itself, just to put it in perspective, when you learn how to fly the F-16, you probably do, totally guessing here, it's been a while, 30 to 40 flights maybe. The syllabus to learn, because you're already competent in flying a fighter,
Right.
it could be anywhere from 70 to 100 flights you're going to get in that very short window, November to March, to prep for the actual air show season. So what I would say about the training, it's all baby steps. It's any skill set, and it's something very similar that we're going to experience with learning about the Dragon systems. You start with basic elements where you fly a single ship. You get comfortable doing certain maneuvers, and then you incorporate another aircraft. You're pretty further apart. You work a little bit closer. You do some basic formations, loops, rolls. And then you slowly progress into what you see on an air show is the 6-ship Delta formation, as well as the integration that you'll see between the Diamond and the Solos with deconfliction and rejoins, and it's a very comprehensive training plan that you'll go through throughout the entire off season, and then you kick it off in March with the first air show.
That's great. And then what's it like to be on that team touring for air shows and demonstrating the F-16 and the Air Force piloting capabilities like that?
First off, I got a comment about the picture. That's definitely not me. So you notice you're always looking for symmetry in the photo.
Oh, right.
And right there, number 4 is he's probably got the same references he or she's supposed to see. But typically in a pass and review that you'll see right there, you'll stack high to give that symmetry. So feel free to change that picture anytime. But as far as flying the F-16, I can't. There you go. Oh.
There you go.
As far as flying the F-16, it's by far my favorite. And obviously I'm partial based on the experiences I've had flying the F-16. But you truly strap it on, so to speak. It's a very powerful, 25,000 pounds of thrust, plus or minus, depending on which engine you're flying. But literally, it's, and I'm not a very big guy, I'm 5'9". You got about a fifth Swiss from the top of the canopy, the side canopy's right here, and it's very, very responsive. You got the throttle on the left, the side stick, which moves very little because it's fly-by-wire, 35 pounds of thrust. So, when you're pulling G's, you feel like you're ripping the stick off when in reality it's only 35 pounds of thrust. So it's just a very unique airframe to fly. Certainly different from the ones that we fly now or the trainers that I flew. But I would say some of the best flying was in the Thunderbirds because it's all about the stick and throttle. That's your sole purpose in life, is to fly formation, other than the non-flying elements of representing the 300,000 airmen within the Guard, active duty, and reserves of the Air Force, which is obviously an extremely important responsibility, but specifically to the flying. Being able to get to a certain level of competency with the training that's provided, that, again, anyone could achieve if given the opportunity. So I'm very blessed to have those opportunities. You get that much exposure, you can develop the skill set necessary to be able to fly anywhere from 3 feet down to 18 inches, which was some of the formations that we would fly. For example, Arrowhead, I would move up and tuck right in, and we would sometimes incentivize other pilots, fighter pilots with years of experience, in the back seat, because sometimes I would fly the 2-seat F-16. You would stick them in the back seat and let them experience something different, because not everyone gets to fly the formation as fast and as close and as low as the Thunderbirds do. And they would be white-knuckled, telling you to back off, when in reality it's just something you get very used to. In the first year that I flew, you're like white-knuckled, even with all that experience. It's not till the latter part of that season into the next where you kind of can smoke a lucky, look around, and you can maintain situational awareness with those close formations.
That's awesome. And of course, there have been some cool flyovers with that team.
There have, and this is actually where you and I have a bit of a connection that I realized today in prepping for this show. Because the Thunderbirds in 2008, you actually flew over the Space Shuttle Endeavour as she was on the pad getting ready for a mission to the International Space Station. And I'm always curious about this moment, because you talked about when your love for flying initiated, and a lot of things I hear from Air Force pilots and Navy pilots was the ultimate vehicle they had hoped to fly one day. Were you hoping to fly to space when you were going over here doing this type of flyover, or was that a farthest thing from your mind at the time?
Honestly, if full disclosure, it was the furthest thing. I never dreamed I would ever be in a position where I would have the opportunity to go in space. I've been trying to dig up. My kids came across one of my grade sheets from high school. If I find it, I'll post it online. I'm not shy. But let's just say I was around that C level, maybe a couple B's, but quite a few D's in there. I did not have academic aspirations. I was very focused on fitness and sports. So it certainly wasn't at the forefront that, hey, there might be a chance to go to space. Because again, I grew up in the right stuff. We were still, America was still on its high with NASA and the space shuttle, and previous to that, all the Mercury and Gemini and lunar accomplishments. And it's just it's a very deep history that we all need to continue to recognize and highlight, just like we want to do moving forward with Polaris Dawn, because we truly are standing on the shoulders of giants and what they were able to accomplish in those programs. But I vividly remember doing that flyover. It was in 2000, I believe it was 7. But one of the solos had a aircraft maintenance issue. So we couldn't launch, and the photo itself is taken from 7 or 8, one of the other aircraft. We typically go to a show site with anywhere from 7 to 8 aircraft. 7 and 8 have other roles. One of them is the more or less the second in command. He is the operations officer, and he or she is responsible for grading and the safety eyes on the ground. And then 8 is the solo pilot, or I'm sorry, the advanced pilot. So he or she will pre-position to the show site, set up the logistics, and help a lot of coordination. Their additional duties also include flying photo chase, as well as incentive flights for celebrities, for dignitaries, for anyone that we want to reward with flying in the F-16. Something that Jared got to do last year, which was really cool. But one of the aircraft broke, so not unfortunately, you're only seeing the diamond here, which is the main part of the show. We joke quite a bit. We actually have 4 Thunderbirds on our team, the Polaris Dawn team. So myself, we have Stroker Gustafson, who replaced me as number 4 in 2009 and 10 show season. Slick Baum, John Baum, was one of the wingmen. And then we have Samantha Weeks, which was on our team, the same team, 2007, 2008, and she was the first female solo pilot. So, we built a deep bullpen of former Thunderbirds, and you can only imagine the camaraderie and the jabbing that we give each other when we do take these jets for some flybys. But we actually got to go inside the shuttle during our visit there. I have a bunch of photos. Maybe I'll post those on Twitter if I can figure out the whole social media, which I'm relying on my daughters to help me out there. But yeah, really cool photos of climbing through. We got in the bunny suits. We got to sit in the cockpit. And I was shocked by the limited space. I thought for sure there'd be this, more volume to be able to crawl around. Absolutely not. You get in there.
Huge, and they're claustrophobic on the inside in reality. Yeah.
It's crazy. It's all relative climbing in the Dragon capsule, but the shuttle you would think is something a little more spacious, but it wasn't. So I'll post some of those to share with you guys.
Something else you sort of touched upon here, and I'm wondering how you sort of see the connection, because the formation flying, and when you're talking about getting 18 inches away from another aircraft in some regards, and how that would concern your passengers, might we say. But there's a lot of trust that goes into formation flying. How do you see that sort of going forward to the trust that you have to put in your crew members for this 4-day flight and all that comes before it as well?
That's a very, very good point. Trust is so critical for mission success. I don't care if you're flying fighters in a formation of 2, 4, 20. Everyone needs to know what their roles and responsibilities are, and it's more than just one person. Everyone's got to step up and fulfill their obligations and their roles, and that will inherently build the trust between the team. We see it when we fly around, even to this day. Jared's got a lot of experience flying air shows with the Black Diamond team, and all the other pilots. We've flown together. Leif and I flew 20-something years ago at Aviano in Italy together in combats, and Stroker and Slick and Combo, we've all flown formation together in the Thunderbirds, and it's only because of that trust that we've been able to build do we have the capacity and the safety inherent in the formation that we fly that you'll see when we do some of these flyovers. We take everything very, very seriously. We brief mission plan, we brief the formation and the mission, what we're going to accomplish, and then after the mission execution, we sit down and go, okay, I didn't like how we did this maneuver on the reposition coming back for a east to west pass on the north side of Starbase. So we'll be very critical. We got thick skin, so there's very little patting on the back. In the Air Force, it's referred to as nice shoes. You suck, nice shoes. So you always want to, have a little bit of constructive criticism, but the point of the debrief is to improve and get better. Where that ties into Polaris Dawn, um, honestly, it's the reason why we selected the crew that we have. You look at the space operations and engineer experience that Sarah and Anna have. I couldn't imagine two better individuals that I would want to go up in on that mission for Polaris Dawn. Obviously, Jared, certainly a high level of trust. With flying with him, he's a proven astronaut, mission commander with Inspiration4. That trust started over a year ago when the Inspiration4 crew started their training. As Sarah, the lead trainer, taught the basics to Jared and the crew, Haley, Cy, and Chris. And frankly, I was blessed to have the opportunity to kind of sit in the back seats and watch their entire their training regime, and go through the syllabus with them as an observer. So hopefully, the inherent trust that we've been able to build upon over the last year is only going to continue to carry forward as we start our training here in a couple months.
And regarding to formation flying, and actually, we're gonna start bringing in questions in from chat too. So people, if you have questions, tag us at NASASpaceflight. This is actually a quick question for Chris G about what we're talking about here, because you mentioned that you have a connection with Kid with this photo, but I don't think you actually mentioned what your connection to the photo was.
Oh, yeah. So the day that this happened, my memory of this, so this was STS-123. It was a very rapid turnaround on the same pad between, in fact, the previous mission might have still been up there at the station when the photo was taken. It was a rapid turnaround. This was the second mission that I was covering for NASA Spaceflight. I'd been with the organization for maybe a month at this point, but there was a briefing, and I can't remember if it was the countdown demonstration with the crew or if it was a flight readiness review, but there was something happening that day that we were there and got to see the Thunderbirds go by and do that flyover. Yeah.
That's very cool, and I will remember that tour. I mean, we got the whole dog and pony, which was we got all the way up to the top. On the tower itself, looking down on the fuel tanks. We got to climb inside the capsule. It was, that certainly planted a seed in my brain as far as what's in the realm of possible with space travel.
And keeping some other questions coming. Again, we were talking about the air and motion sickness kind of part of it, and that's actually already answering part one of this question from our good friend Michael Seeley. How you doing, Seeley? But the second part of this question, I gotta ask, how is John Snap Krause as a second seater in flight?
He's got some game. It's the Alpha Jet is a very responsive aircraft based on the aerodynamics of the wing. You can see there the swept wing. It's a fairly rapid roll rate that you can experience. And, growing up in my flying history, the whole air sickness, you learn to minimize the unnecessary inputs just because, you want a steady flight, especially when you fly instead of flyers in the back seat. So when you train guys and girls how to fly, like I did at Luke Air Force Base, at Aviano Air Force Base or Air Base, you fly in the back seat, and the student flies in the front seat. And just like any syllabus, it's progression where you have to have that IP in the back seat, and then as they progress from basic fighter maneuvers, fighting 1v1 to intercepts, 2v2 to 4v4, this you end up it's a single seat fighter, so you get your own fighter, and then the student will fly as your wingman. I would tend to take vacations during those initial phases of training, just so I wouldn't have to fly in the back seat. Just because it's just like unnecessary. It's just like teaching your daughter, which I'm doing right now, teaching your daughter how to drive. It's just unnecessary inputs, overcorrecting, and it's but back to Krause, back to Snap, as he's affectionately known on our team. Snap was, we flew recently from Starbase up to St. George in the Alpha Jet with Leif in the other aircraft. And I let him have the stick the entire time. So I may have controlled the throttle just a little bit, just so we didn't drift too far away from our wingman. But all in all, he maintained a good tactical formation. It's not easy. You gotta superimpose the aircraft on the horizon at a certain point, high-low stack on the horizon, and you also got to maintain a certain lateral distance, and that's called tactical formation. Whether it's line abreast, a mile, mile and a half, 2 miles, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And you give them that reference, okay, snap, hold that picture. And he did a good job. After a while, I had to provide very few inputs. The only thing we really got to work on is that up and down. And it's pretty, Alpha Jet is pretty sensitive, and so am I when I'm not in control. But he's got some game, and I see him getting his pilot's license here pretty soon.
That's awesome. Talking about that formation flying, we actually have a video from when the Alpha Jets were flying over Starship not too long ago, and we actually even our good buddy Jack Beyer, who was recording that, actually caught some cockpit audio, and he wanted us to ask about this because the pilot communications, especially during formation flying, is super interesting, and I'm sure that's going to tie directly into how you communicate over a spaceflight mission too.
Absolutely. So comm is critical because it's very predictive. You want to know where the boss is going. Boss, known as the commander leader, whoever's leading the formation, the flight lead, if you will. You want to know which ways he or she's turning, left, right, up, down, power corrections, and you use the communications to amplify that to make it more predictive. So, and it's Thunderbirds do it, Blue Angels do it. It's referred to as sing-songy. You're more or less singing the communications. Little more pull, moving forward, left turn, little more pull, and so you're using this communication just prior to actual inputs in the aircraft, so you can make these corrections. Because if you're on the high end of the momentum and that aircraft is turning left, you might get left behind if you don't anticipate it and move up, because you're on a the outside of that momentum. So you're constantly making those audio inputs. Now you add 4 aircraft, 6 aircraft total in the formation. You really want to have your wingmen who are flying formation anticipate your maneuvers. And we were talking about it in the beginning about some of these flyovers, Super Bowl, Daytona 500. The flight lead, the boss, has to be thinking so many steps in advance in anticipation of these flyovers. Daytona 500, man, many moons ago when we did it, there was a blimp right above the racetrack. And, we're trying to get that blimp to move because, you got to thread the needle if that blimp is just going to sit there. So things like that, you got to anticipate and boil it down to the basic fighter maneuver or the basic fundamentals of flying formation. You got to anticipate. So you'll hear that comm if anyone's ever listening, and we practice it as well when we're flying formation because it's critical to safety, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. We got a couple questions from Chad about your different flying experiences, so we're definitely going to dive into this. And again, we got so much cool flying to talk about, and then, of course, a whole bunch of spaceflight as well. Yeah. So we're going to get to all of it. And we've already got Polaris questions coming in, but flooding in. But some piloting questions still. Musical Wolves is asking, what's the highest altitude that you have ever flown to? And, of course, we'll be broken by Crew Dragon, but so far...
As far as aviation or obviously I haven't flown to space yet, so I assume that's an aviation question. I got to make sure I don't incriminate myself. I think 50,000 is the limit where and honestly, it's more of one of those things where you kind of just touch and you come back down because the aerodynamic properties of a fighter with a very short stubby wing, it's a very unstable aircraft. Especially at those pressure altitudes, and so I think I touched 50. But where we operate, we're happy in that 15,000 up to 25,000. That's where you get the best performance of the aircraft, pulling 9 Gs, 9 times your body weight. So if your cranium weighs 10 pounds, under 9 Gs, it's going to weigh 90 pounds. So you really got to maintain that fitness level to be able to handle the G forces. when you're flying those fighters. Yeah, but as far as the performance and altitude, I think I touched 50 once upon a time over career.
Very cool. And then let's see, another question. Have you ever had to pull the ejection
Oh,
handle?
geez, no, not that question.
No?
No, please, I gotta knock on wood. Just like many other reliable systems, whether it's in Crew Dragon, whether it's in the fighters that we fly, safety is utmost.
Of course.
You know, it's the seat that we want to make sure the pyro is fully. You know, it's an element of safety that we do not cross.
Sure.
Thankfully, I've never had to eject, and that's a single seat fighter, single engine fighter. Sorry, it's extremely reliable. I've flew over 3,000 hours, 20 plus years in the Air Force. I have plenty of friends. The engine did quit, and we're not near an airport, but the seat is extremely reliable, an ACES 2 seat. So you gets back to that element of trust.
Right.
We have crew chiefs dedicated, highly experienced that work on our aircraft. They're not going to let us take an aircraft without that element of safety that's been vetted and prepped and inspected, and it's hopefully something that I never have to do.
Good to hear. And then one more chat question here before we get back to some other topics here. Any tips for someone working on their private pilot license and how to work their way up to jets?
Ooh, honestly, it's take it from the Jared School of Aviation. It's frequency, if you can. You know, some of us don't have the resources, but it's all about frequency and currency and maintaining a certain level skill set and then building upon that to become more comfortable and more experienced as you work through your aviation career. It takes a long time and a lot of experience to get to that comfort level, you know, and I used this example previously with flying for the Thunderbirds. It's not like you're going to be able to jump in a fighter jet and fly that close, that low, and that fast. Because you're pulling G's. We're pulling over 4 G's in those close formations, 18 inches apart. You have to build upon those skill sets to get to those competent levels of execution. So if anything, I would just say the more repetitions you can get, you know, that 10,000 rule of practicing something. You got to get better at it and build upon that skill set to be able to get to the desired end result of flying jets, which is quite an experience.
All right.
Well, I think that's actually a fantastic segue into sort of another thing that you do, because you've mentioned a few times here already, fitness and health are very important to you, but I want everyone to know, like, we're not just talking going to the gym a few times a week and, you know, having a salad here or there. Like, we're talking marathons, Ironman, triathlons, those types of things. I mean, talk to us a little bit about your health journey. Why are those things in particular very, very important to you?
You know, I'm a very driven person, which can be a pro and it can be a con. You know, you look at my academic career; it was less than stellar just because I lacked that motivation. That is until I got the aviation bug at the University of New Hampshire. Once I realized what I had to do to get to pilot training, I was a different person. I was very motivated at that point. I will say my degree is in outdoor education, so I took a slightly different route of winter mountaineering, outdoor skiing, or Nordic skiing, scuba diving, rock climbing. So it was a cool experience. I learned some actual skill sets that we're applying today with some of our mountain climbing. But I was extremely driven as a kid. It's competitive. Just ask my parents. It was anytime they put me in a sport, I I couldn't settle for being just mediocre. I had to do as much as I possibly could. Late night shooting baskets, extra miles when I started running. Golf, I was big into golf until they cut the program, and I played on the high school team when I was in middle school. They cut the team, so I started running. And then that kind of sparked my endurance career. High school champion in cross country back in my junior year, many moons ago, probably before you guys were born, in the early 90s. And then from there, I was a lifeguard on Cape Cod, so the swimming element was there, and I always had a passion for cycling. So I kind of threw it together when I actually joined the Air Force upon graduation, and I decided, hey, let me give one of these triathlons. It was a sprint, so you got sprints that can be any distance. Shorter distances, anywhere from a half hour to an hour. You got Olympic distance, is what you see in the Olympics. That's about an hour, or 2 hours, sorry. And then you start getting into the longer races, the half Ironmans or the 70.3s, and then on into Ironmans and then ultras. Again, like I was sparked with Top Gun and Right Stuff, I saw a production of the Ironman on NBC, and I was like, I want to do that. So I started training, signed up for my first Ironman in 2000, I believe it was, and then worked my way up. Got a chance to go to Hawaii, which is the World Championships, a couple times. And it's been very rewarding. If there's anything that is a byproduct of my fitness, it's if I can humbly say, it's inspiration. It's because I'm so driven that when the team or anyone sees me going out running at 5, 6 in the morning to go do 5, 6 miles, hopefully that can inspire others. It was a message that I communicated when I was on the Thunderbirds, and we go talk to high schools. To me, it was just corny. Hey, I try to color myself red, RED, respect, education, and drive. The whole respect piece, it was respecting others. You treat others how you want to be treated. It can certainly go a long way, and there are examples throughout my career where I just treated someone nice. I didn't know who they were or how they could impact my life, but ultimately it got me selected for the Thunderbirds based on building that network. But the second element of that respect is respecting your body with fitness, nutrition. I've had my ups and downs. There is an element of drinking in the fighter community. At certain times, you hit a low, but then you change things around, and I refocus on the fitness aspects of my life. And it got me to some really cool experiences with the Ironman, with going to Hawaii, representing the Air Force. And that had a huge impact on the cadets. When I was here at the Air Force Academy, I was involved with the swim team as well as the triathlon team. And we ended up doing Ironmans collectively. I did them right along the next to the cadets, and it was a true inspiration for them. And hopefully that's a skill set that they will carry throughout their life, just like I have.
That's awesome to hear about. And I want to start tying this into the spaceflight aspect of all of this as well. So we started with flying, and at some point you end up at Draken International, which is, of course, is Mr. Isaacman's private Air Force. How did you get involved in that? Is that where you met Jared, or did you meet Jared before then? How did that part of your journey start?
So I had met Jared previously during the air show time frame in my life. He was just getting involved in Black Diamond, procuring fighter aircraft. So I befriended him back then, became an acquaintance, and then I was familiar with what he was developing, which is an ingenious concept. The idea of a contractor providing adversary support for the DoD is brilliant at a substantially lower cost. So just to provide some background, historically, we generate our own adversary support organically, meaning I'm stationed in Aviano Air Base, Italy. We're going to teach some wingmen how to fly some basic tactical formations and some long range tactics. You got to have a platform to fight against. So that's that adversary role. Well, again, you're going to replicate, whether it's China tactics, Russia tactics, something not in the norm of what you're taught with regard to tactics, techniques, and procedures. Our Bible, if you will, 3-1. So the fact that you're doing something that's completely different, you're relying a lot more on the guy or girl on the ground that's controlling your formation. It's called GCI, ground control intercept. They're the ones looking at a radar screen. Good guys over here, bad guys over here. I'm going to maneuver that adversary formation to a certain point to intercept the good guys. So that skill set is not consistent with the way you should be training. So, now you look at the cost benefits. The cost of an F-16, we're talking somewhere between $25,000 and $30,000 an hour. You go all the way out to an F-22, F-35 with the 5th generation fighters. You can only imagine you're now sending out a pilot out there to turn off systems, fly straight and level, and listen to someone tell them what to do, versus the idea behind those systems and those aircraft, it's very autonomous. What one aircraft can do, a fleet of formation of 4, 6 F-16s could do. Can't believe I just said that, but I did. But generational. You talk about 4th gen, 5th gen. Those capabilities, you need to hone the way you should be training. And when you start replicating someone else, it's not cross prohibited, and it's kind of counter to what you should be focused on. So back to Draken, when he started buying these fleets of aircraft, the idea was, okay, I'm going to provide this service at a fraction of the cost. We're talking like the cheapest aircraft for the for the Air Force. We're going to go 1/5 the cost. So now I'm going to be able to put up 5, 6, 8 aircraft and fly for an hour at the cost it would be to operate one 5th gen, 4th gen fighter. Took a while. Jared, along with a team, the ones he flew air shows with during Black Diamond, Stroker and Slick, the 2 I've mentioned previously that are on our team, they were part of the founding team that created Draken. A bunch of cold calls, rejection letters, until about the late fall of 2015 when they got their first proof of concept. So, the Air Force says, all right, we'll give this a shot. Navy's been kind of doing something similar with ship services, meaning you throw up a contractor flying a fighter straight and level, simulating a cruise missile, and the radars on ships in the water will run their systems to try to interrogate and target this simulated cruise missile. So the contracting framework kind of existed in the Navy, but they never really took it to that next level, which was, logically speaking, it was the evolution of, okay, let's incorporate this into some air data. That, and here's the acceleration of my story, is, into 2015, proof of concept. Here's 1 month's worth of flying for you guys at Nellis. And the idea was, all right, you're going to fly, every day for a month, and then you're out. They haven't left since. So that was 2015. So it's been 7 years, a little under 7 years that they've been there supporting. That industry has now grown into a $6 billion industry with, there's 4 main companies that do this. It's proliferated throughout the Air Force, into the Navy and the Marines. Everyone has jumped on board, and it's just proven to be this high cost savings for the DoD. So where I come in this story is, I was coming off of Afghanistan deployment, entering my last year within the Air Force at 20 years. My wife was challenged with a cancer diagnosis, and we made some life decisions at that point. I'm like, you know what? I got to prioritize some things here and put my family first. So we elected to call it quits after 20 years. We had some great experiences, but honestly, what I was staring at in the next phase of my career was multiple 1-2 year assignments away from family, uncontrolled opportunities as far as what I'd be able to do. So it was time to put the family first. So we retired, and I was looking at, what am I going to do next? The logical transition is to fly airlines, and spent 6 months away from the fam. I'm just like, man, there's got to be something else I can do with my life. And I knew Stroker was involved with Rook, with Draken. I reached out to him. I remember the actual moment. Wife and I were walking through Costco, and I reached out, and he's like, "Dude, come work for me. We just got a contract with the Air Force. We'll build this, dream, and we'll create this entire service for the military." So I immediately hung up, said, I think we're going to jump on board with the business development of Draken. And I ended up doing that for about 5 years. I worked for Stroker Gustafson doing the whole business development. We grew the contracts. And subsequently, Jared sold the company to Blackstone. And it was a great experience. We got to fly fighters. We got to provide this service, get to continue those friendships and networks within the military. And to this day, it's providing a service that is invaluable to the men and women who are defending our skies.
Fantastic. And then moving into another jaredizing company that you've also been involved with, you had a little part in Shift4. How did you get involved there?
So I made the decision once kind of the team, once Jared relinquished command of Draken and Stroker moved on as well. It was just a natural transition. It's time for me to try something else. Not knowing that Jared was going to offer me a gig at Shift4. It was a couple days, and he's like, "Hey, you want to try something different?" I said, "Sure, why not?" I'm always up. I feel young at heart, even though my cranium and age don't show it. But I wanted to try something new, and so he put me on his strategy team with Taylor Lauber. It was a fire hose effect. I'd never been involved with, a business such as Shift4 for payment processing. I spent the first couple months just trying to learn as much as possible, interacting with a lot of the investors and potential clients and customers, and just learning all things POS for Shift4. That lasted about a couple months, and then Jared shared his venture with all things Inspiration4. So I had just enough time to get my feet wet with strategy within Shift4 until this opportunity arose with Inspiration4. And I became the one of the directors. I hate calling myself the mission director for Inspiration4 because what Anna and Sarah do on the SpaceX side as far as being a mission director is a hell of a lot more important, critical, and highly complex than the things I were responsible for with Inspiration4. But that has been an amazing year, to say the least, with working with that team.
Yeah, so we'll talk about what did you do for the Inspiration4 mission as a mission manager with this amazing mission that flew last year?
I think I did the whole gamut of getting coffee for everyone, all the way out to I got to be on the recovery ship and sit in mission control during the launch. Anything and everything I had the opportunity to be involved with. Honestly, we really didn't know what we were getting ourselves into back in December of 2020 when Jared came up with this concept, this vision. And he was adamant about making it bigger than himself. This first all-civilian mission to space, he's a big believer in the vision of Elon and SpaceX, and frankly, they're both visionaries. Jared saw where this had the potential to become extremely impactful and open up those doors to make space exploration more accessible to all. So how we were going to get there, the journey, the path that we were going to follow, we were making it up as we were going along. We knew we wanted to do something more than just, as much as I would have loved to have been selected, it was about something bigger than an individual. It was having unique opportunities for someone out of the blue, whether it was the sweepstakes or with the Super Bowl commercial that we came up with, whether it was a contest utilizing the Shift4 shop platform within Shift4, and then lastly, just partnering with a charity that has a direct impact on Earth and humanity back here on this planet. And it was a natural. I mean, we reached out to a couple charities, but it was a perfect fit from day one with St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. I think it was less than 24 hours when they generated an entire department within St. Jude, even without a commitment from Jared. It was just a kind of one of those introductory feeler type meetings on Zoom, and this is what we're thinking. There was a lot of mind blowing, but they didn't hesitate. They jumped right on it, built this team, and we worked with their team from day one. We're still working with them, and there's a reason why we're still partnered with St. Jude, because they have such a huge impact. You know, the number one discriminator for children's surviving cancer is where they're born in this world. You know, it's 4 out of 5 kids will likely survive cancer here in the U.S. It's completely opposite globally, where it's 1 in 5. And we got to change that. Yes, we set a lofty goal of $200 million, and that ultimately ended up over $240 million. Thanks to everyone out there that has donated to this cause and trying to eradicate cancer. But that's just it. We haven't eradicated cancer. There's still much we can do. And we wanted to make, with Polaris Dawn and the Polaris program, we want to make it on a global scale. So St. Jude had a natural tie with their global initiative. And that's where our focus is today, is to continue to raise awareness. And we're setting some objectives to do some of the research and science and testing behind some of this technology that's going to help people better communicate with developing countries. You know, telemedicine is a perfect example. Someone in a challenged society without the resources necessary, or not even knowing that they have the resources available, like St. Jude, we want to test and proliferate that technology to allow these kids to get the access to you know, some of the medicine that is, you know, here in America that they are privileged to have.
And I know we have questions too about some of the experiments and how they're going to connect both with St. Jude and to the larger elements of space exploration moving forward. One thing I am curious of before we get to to those specific things, because your role, however you define it for Inspiration 4, is kind of in hindsight now a very interesting one, given that you are going to fly. So I'm curious from that perspective of having managed or overseen or had oversight of a mission from the pure ground side of things. What do you think that's helping you bring to the training for this mission that will help streamline that training or help provide new insight in ways that maybe haven't been there before?
Oh, that's a great question. Uh, First off, just based on the unique opportunity of being involved in more or less everything that was going on with Inspiration 4, from the fundraising, the science and research with Trish, to the training. I mean, I think I missed 1 week out of the entire year with the crew doing their training in the simulators at Hawthorne. Hopefully, based on those experiences, I can help our team that we've built with C.R. Grover and Casey Phillips and Leif and Slick and Stroker and Combo. We've morphed to make it better and to accomplish more and to make this a little more operationally focused, having that operational mindset. Because yes, we could easily, you know, continued the endeavor of making it more accessible and randomly picking people, but we're about moving the needle. We want to push the envelope within the realm of safety, obviously, and there are certain objectives that we've set out with Polaris Dawn that will hopefully help SpaceX continue to move that needle, making space exploration more accessible to all. And if there's anything that I can hopefully bring to this fight and to this mission, is my fighter experience, doing operational tests, being in certain combat environments where it was stressful. And, you know, there is inherent risk in what I did for 20 plus years and continue to do with flying fighters. So hopefully that experience we can kind of leverage and springboard from in our endeavors with the objectives that we've set out. I will caveat all this with, I've got the trainers who are on this team who built the training syllabus and trained Jared how to operate, the Falcon 9 and the Crew Dragon. They harp on me because I beat up myself too much, but I'm certainly the wink link. So I want to contribute as much as I possibly can. I know how fortunate I am. It could be anyone. It could be Stroker. It could be Slick. Could be Leif. Anyone sitting in my seat. Anyone else. I'm just very fortunate to have this opportunity, and I am not going to let it go to waste. Figuratively speaking, I'm not going to sleep. I'm going to do everything I possibly can to get the message out there, whether it's, podcasts and interviews and just relaying the message and, communicating our endeavors because, quite frankly, I started doing this whole social media and there are a couple of haters out there. It's just like, you don't get it, right? With the endeavors that Elon has set forth and what we're looking to accomplish is going to benefit all of humanity. And I want to be just a little part of that and contribute as much as possible. That gets to some of the science and research that we're set out to do as far as the medical is concerned. The SpaceX team is going to hate me for bringing this one up, but there's a lot of caveats to it, and when we're working through the regulatory approval. But one of the biggest challenges associated with long-duration spaceflight is SANS, spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome, which is any of the impact that micro zero gravity can have on the optic nerve on the brain as it sits in cerebral fluid, and that goes down the spine. And up to this point in space travel, there have been no, let's call them invasive experiments that have been authorized or approved by the FDA. They're going to have to go through all the regulatory approval with the IRB, the Independent Review Board. But again, it's about the mindset that we've adopted, that we want to push the needle and, no pun intended with the needle. We want to do as much as we possibly can. That's going to help. Gets back to the overall mission of Polaris, and that's taking some of these 3 human space flights, 2 in Falcon, and then ultimately having the first human fly in Starship, which is going to get us back to the moon and further out to Mars and beyond. So back to where I'm trying to contribute is I volunteered myself. Hopefully the fact that I'm in good physical shape, I can kind of participate in some of these experiments. And one of them is called an invasive ICP. And that's, they're, again, regulatory approval, a transducer that's going to be surgically implanted underneath the rib cage, and it's connected to a catheter that will go up into the spinal cord, and it will measure the pressure of the fluid in the spine, which is the same pressure that your brain experiences. So 3 months prior, if we can cross these hurdles, we'll have the surgery. I'll go through some ground testing, go back to the centrifuge, test it under certain G levels, fly in the fighter, try different certain G levels, different environment. All goes well, I'll go fly with it on Polaris Dawn. They got this wand that you swipe underneath the transducer. It takes the reading of the pressure itself. You do pre-flight, during the mission itself, and post-flight. And then you get this level of data that they've never been able to collect before. And again, I just hope it contributes to, and that's one of the number one challenges that astronauts are going to face when they do decide to go beyond the moon and with these long duration space flights. Who knows what the impact is going to be on the optic nerve and vision and the brain itself. So we'll see. I'll bring everyone along on that journey if it does get approved. But yeah, that's some of the things that we're lined up to do.
So I have 2 follow-up questions to that, because that is a fascinating part of the mission to me, and I know there's stuff that obviously you can't talk about yet, and that's definitely pending, as you said, the regulatory approval process. I think it's more of a personal question for you. What is it within you that made you say, "Oh, I'd do that if we got the chance"? Um,
It's honestly, without hesitation, it gets back to my Air Force roots and volunteering for service and trying to inspire. And that gets down to some of the experiences I had within the military, serving on the Thunderbirds. I fully understand anyone can fulfill those roles. The cycle is rotated every 2 years, so there are better pilots to come before me, and there's better pilots after me. So I know there's a purpose for all the experiences and things you do in your life, and I don't want this opportunity to go amiss. Um, I saw my 20 years as an opportunity to serve my military. I've been rewarded with certainly some unique and challenging and very rewarding experiences, my family included. We reminisce quite frequently on how awesome it was and the friends that we met, especially moving here. You move to a foreign state, town, you really don't know anyone. We know so many people here, and it all stems back to our experiences in the military. And it certainly breeds an element of volunteerism, and it becomes ingrained. Service before self is one of the pillars. It's preached ad nauseum at the Air Force Academy and all the institutions throughout the military. It's what we do, and it's something that I want to capitalize on to make sure that we are moving the needle. I do not want to land and go, damn it, I should have volunteered, or I should have did this, or I had this opportunity. Me, this might be a one and done, and I got to make the most of it because life's too short, and you only have so much jet fuel in the fighter, so you got to use every ounce of it.
Very, very, very true. Very, very, very. I know we've got a lot of questions. Thomas, did we want to keep going? Did we want to take some from the chat, or do we want to
Yeah,
keep
sure. I've
going?
got the bank of chat questions has almost all been Polaris stuff, so we're definitely gonna dig into this now because there's a whole lot of really good ones. Again, at NASASpaceflight in chat, I'm still looking for new ones too. So if you got more questions, we're gonna dive right into Polaris now. Let's start at the beginning of the story. When did this idea of the Polaris program really get going with SpaceX?
Oh man, it was a natural evolution. I mean, a lot of hypothetical in theory type conversations. Because space was our life for the last year.
Mm-hmm.
What does the natural progression look like? What if given the opportunity for an Inspiration 4.2, what would it look like? And back to Jared's vision, we got to capitalize on this opportunity. We got to make it worthwhile. We got to move the needle and push the envelope. So it was only a few short months ago. In fact, I wasn't involved in the direct that he worked out with SpaceX, but I was certainly involved in the bar top napkin discussions over a few beers, figuring out, okay, if we did, what would it look like, or what is the next progression as far as setting certain objectives or goals? What does SpaceX need to do to bridge that gap? And quite frankly, we do a lot of these conversations on our run. I remember, we discussed, all right, let's look at space history. Let's look at the various programs. If it's a multi-mission concept, how can we leverage and continue to stand on the shoulders of giants and emulate and take some of their lessons learned and figure out how we can bridge that gap? You got initial LEO human flights with Falcon 9 and Crew Dragon. The next step, the next chapter is getting humans into Starship, which will ultimately go from low Earth orbit out to the moon and beyond. And that's where some of the conversations started with, okay, EVA is logical, docking is logical, altitudes, the science and research will always be a part of this. And it's kind of one of those things humility should take over in the fact that we don't like to be not associated, but compared to or analogous to Gemini program. But it's something that we look at, and we have the utmost respect for what they were able to accomplish. And they set some pretty lofty goals with EVA, with altitude, with docking, and so it was that kind of template we wanted to kind of emulate, because they are true heroes in all things space history. So that's where it started. Discussions started to evolve and increase once the negotiations were accomplished. Well after Inspiration4, and we had our initial mission design meetings with the SpaceX team, and those were great conversations because there's elements of sci-fi still involved in what can we do, what's in the realm of possible, and there's also reality. Okay. This first mission's less than a year away. What can we actually accomplish based on that timeline? Again, with the ultimate goal of continuing to make space exploration more accessible. We talked at depth about the EVA, about the suits, about altitude, because radiation is one of the biggest concerns. So sands, radiation, suits. So it was a natural, and honestly, it was a conversation that Jared had with Elon. A lot of those ideas came from Elon, and when Elon speaks, people respond. And so those conversations have led into, bottom line, what we're looking at to accomplish on this mission.
And of course, we're pulling up one of your tweets here referencing one of those Gemini records, which of course, Polaris is going to be aiming to potentially break that record. What's that kind of looking like? And of course, are you going to be taking advantage of that environment from a scientific research perspective?
First, the latter part of that question, absolutely. It's one of the main reasons why we want to stretch the limits and get out there to the the furthest that anyone has gone, orbiting the Earth. That's the lower portions of the Van Allen belt. We will be exposed to certain levels of radiation. We're currently looking through what is possible. What can we do to test those levels of radiation, whether it's impacts to the human body. We're considering radiation belts. Or vests, belts. Radiation vests. Dosimeters are going to be plethora on board to measure the exposure. And we're setting up the mission design to be highly elliptical. As far as the specifics behind altitude and, what are the apogee, what's the perigee. In fact, we had meetings yesterday about this exact thing. We're going next week to meet with, we'll have additional conversations next week to continue to refine. So it's something in the works. Ultimately, yes, we would love, to crest that record, because ultimately it's like my tweet. I mean, it's all about bridging the gap and continuing to recognize all the great accomplishments that came from Mercury and Gemini and Apollo. We can't lose sight of those because we'll have a tendency to repeat ourselves in all things history. I mean, perfect example is today, John Glenn circumnavigated the Earth. He was the fifth person to orbit for just under 5 hours, I believe. And that's a huge accomplishment. And I think I saw it once on LinkedIn or Twitter. And as soon as we get done here, I'm going to start typing away to bring recognition to some of the great accomplishments that our forefathers have accomplished.
So sort of along those lines, because I think one of the things that I was very curious about when I heard the altitude and the radiation sort of experiments on this is you don't hear a lot about placing future missions in those radiation belts, right? Like you hear about, you're either sailing right past them to the moon, Mars, or beyond, or you're staying below them for the most part. So why specifically try and gather this data when we don't necessarily plan to stick something there?
That's a great question. The fact that we're going to have to transient the Van Allen belts is reason to understand and learn more about the impact of radiation on the human body. We're certainly not going to fly to the belts and camp out, above the solar Atlantic anomaly. There is elements of
Right.
safety in these conversations that we're having. The idea is highly elliptical. So we touch the belts and come back down into a lower Earth orbit, 150, 200. We'll see how that whole mission design works out and profile. But it's necessary. We need, technology has improved. We need to understand what the impact of that radiation is going to have on computers as we transient through those belts. To this day, satellites and spacecrafts, well, satellites mostly at this point, transient, they'll turn off everything to ensure that they don't crash or reset their computers. So understanding what that impact's going to be, we can hopefully carry those lessons learned on to subsequent missions as well as follow-on programs being Starship. And this is analogous to how we fly fighters, how we go through lessons learned. We know certain basic skill sets. We apply them, we practice them, rehearse them. Based on the outcome, what are the execution errors? What are the contributing factors to cause the end result? And frankly, what is the root cause of the end result? You analyze that to death, and then you come up with lessons learned. Okay, we had this impact, these computers at this time, at this altitude. How can we change things? How can we evolve that software, that hardware to mitigate or prevent those same impacts happening on something that's like going the long haul? The last thing we want to happen is, a day or two into a mission that's headed for Mars, and we have hiccups in our interface with the computers. That's something you don't want to have to worry about, and hopefully we can learn some of those lessons now and not later.
Right. Another, of course, really exciting thing that's going to be tested on the Polaris Dawn mission is the first ever commercial spacewalk, an EVA. But that is going to be a separated objective from the altitude, right? We're looking at a more standard low Earth orbit for that environment. So what does that kind of ConOps look like? Will you be involved? What's the spacewalk shaping out to look like?
Will I be involved? Absolutely. 100% we're all going to be involved. The fact that there's no airlock, we're going to bring the capsule, and we're working through the protocol of how that's all going to occur, whether it's a slow depressurization. We'll bring it all down. So we're all going to be wearing the new EVA/IVA suits that SpaceX is currently designing. You see one of the prototype gloves, and these are initial prototypes. They got a long way to go. They got a dedicated team. What you don't see in the picture is the 12.5 people working hard with the materials, focused in on the thermal protection and the mobility of certain joints, elbows, shoulders, how that's all going to work. And guarantee you they're going to come up with hundreds of different prototypes, which will ultimately be tested in different generations, and then they'll continue to build upon those generations to make it something that is viable and that we're going to, operationally test on this mission. And again, just very similar to the radiation. What worked, what didn't? Capitalize on those benefits, avoid the downfalls or the things that didn't work, so they can develop subsequent generations for suits to come. To your point, yes, we're all going to be involved. We're all going to be trained. We're working through the coordination of how that's all going to work, to the point of how many COPVs we're going to carry, and it's pretty early on in the developmental stage, and we're involved in every step of the way, so it educates us. But we got the best team you can imagine working on this that was on Dragon from the very beginning, that knows the systems in and out. And that's just a testament to the professionalism and competency of this crew. It's impressive every time we go in there, and I'm just hanging on to the slides and what they're talking about. But I'm confident I'll get to the level that I need to be able to execute as needed when it's time to do the EVA.
Awesome. And that's actually, a quick follow-up, but still talking about the EVA for a bit. The spacesuit is they've said it's an upgraded version of the IVA suit, But it's still, you're only carrying 4 suits, right? Each crew member gets 1 suit that functions both in a pressurized and unpressurized environment.
That is correct. One suit that will be just based on the volume constraints that we have with
Right.
with the Dragon. We will utilize that suit for all the way throughout the entire mission, but that's the one that's currently under development.
And what kind of training and testing might already be underway or is already planned for getting ready for this EVA? Obviously, there's development stuff still going on, but as far as testing and training the crew members as well as the Dragon capsule for a full depressurization, what does that look like so far?
Awesome questions. And we got the same one right back at SpaceX. So, in standard SpaceX fashion, we know the suit is going to be kick-ass. How can it not be? And B, they're going to develop a certain training protocol that's going to prepare us the best way possible. Just again, I hate to bring it back to fighters. The best way to train for something is to emulate the best way possible. Mm-hmm. We don't have access to long duration microgravity exposure, so we got to rely on creativity. I've heard concepts of suspension systems. We talked about the NBL. We're going to explore any and all opportunities, the vacuum chamber, anything and everything to be able to expose ourselves, get as much time in this suit when it's pressurized. Some of the testing that Jared's already been under with his old suit to check out mobility and what is working, what really needs to be addressed. So they're going to continue to work tirelessly, and we're going to be involved every step of the way, and we anticipate that training starting in the very near future.
Go ahead, Chris. I know you have some questions too.
Yeah. A couple here still regarding the EVA. This strikes me as something as that doesn't just hold potential for the commercial realm, right? And for what future Polaris missions might need to do in terms of extravehicular activities. We've talked a lot about particular servicing missions that are up there that crew vehicles, could that crew vehicles could help affect. And it strikes me as this being a moment when a commercial mission could greatly impact others that are not even on the table yet by demonstrating this new sort of streamlined spacesuit, potentially streamlined EVA procedures where you don't need to carry up a huge airlock. Can you talk a little bit about what you guys are thinking in terms of that, if you even are and sort of how that's going to work from logistics, like handrails outside, mobility units, things like that. Where's that all sort of landing right now?
Yep. To hit on some of the technical portions of your question, absolutely. There's going to be mobility handhelds somewhere on the capsule. Obviously, big concerns is the TPS protecting the heat shield. But we're exploring any and all. Creativity is certainly not hampered in some of these meetings that we've had as far as what it's going to look like, how long, what's the protocol, the sequence of getting someone translating through the hatch. All those things are being worked out. As far as collaboration, you nailed it right on the head. That's exactly what we have to do, and hopefully this is consistent with the way Elon views IP and what we learn. We want to share lessons learned with everyone so they can capitalize on what we gain in these experiences so we can continue to further progress for accessibility to space exploration. It's a necessity. And we hope that it certainly isn't hampered, that we can have these dialogues with NASA, that considerations that they want to relay to us based on things they learned, especially when it comes to the training, because obviously they're a heck of a lot more proficient at it, spending hours on end in a very comprehensive EVA suit. This is a bigger initiative than Polaris Dawn, than the Polaris Program, than SpaceX. This is about allowing all of humanity to be involved, to get to the moon, to get to Mars. And it's not just an insurance policy that Elon highlights. It is curiosity. It's human nature for us to want to know what's around the corner or what's beyond the next planet. Why not? Someone's going to do it. Why not it be us to continue to push this? We need to capitalize on every opportunity, and the more conversations that we can have, the more collaboration we can have, the safer we're going to make it, and the further we can progress the technology and its development.
So when you talk about that collaboration and you talk about, making this for everyone, I think a one way that really makes us feel like we're up there with you is watching it. And I know a lot of people, myself included, are going to want to watch this one from beginning to end. What's sort of the plan of how you what's sort of the plan for how you plan to do that? A poorly worded question for a really important question.
No, I got good and bad news to answer that question. First off, the good news is it's going to happen. We're going to record it some way, somehow. And again, creativity, it's we've talked selfie sticks, we've talked CubeSats releasing on tethers, and all kinds of potential opportunities to capture the first commercial EVA. As far as what it is, again, it's a priority, and we're going to do everything possible to make sure that we do capture it. But how that looks and the concepts that we're fielding right now, it's kind of an unknown. And we're certainly taking the lead from SpaceX and how certain things are developed. But we're not stopping. We're having these conversations with educational institutions, organizations, companies that have experience. Whether it be Embry-Riddle, they got their Eagle Cam. What a great concept! It's very simple in technology, but it's very effective. So some adaptation generation of Eagle Cam might be an option. It might be as simple as a selfie stick that one of us sticks out the hatch that covers everything. Who knows? But we're going to make sure that all have the opportunity to witness and be a part of this journey, because that gets back to one of Polaris Dawn's and Jared's initiative is we want that wow factor. You bring that wow factor. Inspiration4 was bringing 4 unknowns, 4 people that had no clue a week prior to the announcement, 2 weeks prior, had no clue they were going to space. And you now put them in front of the world stage. Who didn't get, teary-eyed watching Haley's story on the Netflix and what she had to go through, and the fact that she has inspired so many kids who are fighting cancer. We still have conversations with 11, 12-year-olds. Liv is one of my favorites. We talk all the time, and she's 100% convinced she's going to space. No doubt about it. And she just beat cancer. So it's stories like that give us chills, the reason why we're doing what we do.
I want to pivot here because we are getting towards the end of the show, and I want to make sure we hit some other really big points.
I'll shorten up my answers.
No, I love these answers. Keep them coming, please. I do have a question. We're talking about making space accessible to everyone. This is a really good question that I want to make sure I get from chat. Is the Polaris program mindful of enabling, this making space accessible to everyone, making that include people who may be physically handicapped or impaired, and opening access to spaceflight for those kind of people?
Absolutely. There's no walls. There's no borders. There's no inhibitors. Obviously, we're at a certain stage in space exploration that we got to overcome certain challenges, but the idea and the concept is to progress that to make it accessible for all. I mean, we're starting to sound like a broken record. I am starting to sound like a broken record, but that truly is the motivation, because it is going to happen. It's inevitable. We're just thankful and blessed to be a part of that. But we're going to figure out as we work through, okay, we now know the impact of radiation within the Van Allen belt. We tested the first generation EVA suit. We have these lessons learned. We're going to incorporate into the next mission. It's this natural progression that ultimately results in 100 people plus buying a ticket on Starship and getting on that vehicle every 3 hours to launch to Mars and go on their 6-month journey to Mars. And it lands and they put on their EVA suit and walk out on the surface of a in a built-up complex city that that makes our species multiplanetary.
All right, and I got two more questions for you. The first one is a question from the fighter pilot side of your career. As someone who has experienced that kind of maneuverability, and as someone involved with the Polaris program, which is going to put humans on Starship for the first time, how do you feel about that whole flip and burn landing from a putting people on the thing perspective?
That's a great question. And in fact, we had a conversation recently with SpaceX on just theoretical, what does it look like and
Sure.
level of risk associated with certain decisions that we're making, because safety is obviously the utmost, and Falcon is a proven rocket. So hopefully up to this point, the space industry, society has reassurance that there is a fairly respectable safety record of the Falcon 9. They're going to get to that same spot before Jared climbs in that Starship.
Right.
There's no way we can risk, because any mishap that involves humans is going to set the program and, frankly, the entire industry back months, years, who knows. So as far as, how that propulsion landing system, it's going to prove itself during the DT, the developmental testing of this system. And just like, you asked my wife how she feels about me climbing on this rocket. If you asked her a year ago, she would have been like, hells no. The fact that she's been along this entire journey and she knows all these brilliant and, frankly, the most brilliant people in the world working on these systems, she's got no problem. She's just as giddy as I am as far as having this experience over the next year. So frankly, however this plays out, it's gonna build a safety record and a reliability of that system that's gonna make it safe for humans to climb on board and strap it on, so to speak.
Awesome. And then one last question here to wrap things up. So Polaris program, starting off with Polaris Dawn that you will fly on, and a couple missions after that. For the Polaris program overall, which has all this potential to do some really cool things, what about it are you most excited about, and what do you think everyone else watching should be most looking forward to as far as those future Polaris missions?
Oof. You would think I would have come up with an answer by now, but I struggle to answer this one. I think the most excited I was for Inspiration4, that got me teary-eyed, was the launch, watching.
Sure.
Because it's a big culmination of emotions. You
Right.
ramp up this entire program, the media, the training, and then it's like, see ya, good luck, and they walk away in their spacesuits, and it's just like, holy cow, they're about to go strap into a rocket and light the wick, and so that was pretty emotional. So I think that intensity, it's a level of excitement. It's not a fear.
Right.
I got fear of heights, fear of clowns and crowds. Strapping onto a rocket is not going to be fear. There's nothing fearful about it. There's an element of risk associated with anything we do, especially flying fighters. But I have so much confidence in the SpaceX team and family that I have no problem. I'm going to be excited. So certainly the launch, the overview effect everyone talks about. I'm anxious to see how that feels. Hitting that altitude, if we can accomplish that objective, will be a big milestone. Bringing everyone along on that journey with the Starlink laser communication, I hope we have the ability to share everything. I akin to, a Truman Show. Again, I'm probably dating myself, but turn those cameras on, and I don't care if it's like a rough moment, with space adaptation, or if it's, an accomplishment. I want everyone along for the journey, because it's not bells and whistles. We're not, the premier cream of the crop NASA astronauts that are selected over the course of space exploration. We're some average Joes, or at least I am, and we want to make sure that everyone understands the ups and downs, the challenges, the accomplishments that we have along the way. And then obviously reuniting with the family. That was a pretty big deal, flying back on the helicopter, and seeing those guys reunite with the family is a big deal.
And those future Polaris missions that are coming up, what is the biggest thing that we should all be looking forward to and excited about with the potential of Polaris overall?
Probably the wow and shock factor that we tried to get with the announcement of this one.
Mm-hmm.
We will hopefully not disappoint when it's time to announce mission 2 and then mission 3. We have lofty goals, and it's a spectrum. We're over here. SpaceX is over here. We got to meet somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
But it gets back to the overall purpose of this mission is to test that technology and continue to do science and research. We're going to do every second that we have up on orbit is to accomplish as much science and research as we can to further the cause. And to communicate. We want to bring everyone along. We want to continue to spread the awareness of St. Jude's mission. That will not fall on deaf ears because we have so much to accomplish because cancer is not eradicated, and it won't be for some time to come.
Kid, thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us today. This was absolutely amazing. We are going to be following the Polaris program so closely over the next year plus, and look forward to hearing more from you and the rest of the team as we get closer to Polaris Dawn. And of course, those future missions, those announcements, I'm sure will be spectacular. Everyone watching, thank you all for the great questions. Kid, I just want to say you're welcome back anytime.
Absolutely.
Because these were fantastic, and also loved allowing to ask you questions from chat too was awesome.
I don't know what I'm going to cover, but I'll come up with something between now and then.
All right. So yeah, thank you everyone for watching and for all the support that came in as well. Chris, thank you so much for joining me with some Q&A as well.
It was a pleasure. You are a natural interviewer, Thomas. It was. I actually got lost in the conversation many times myself.
So everyone, thank you so much for watching. Kid, thank you for your time, and looking forward to hearing more about Polaris as we get closer to that first launch. Thank you all so much for watching. From the NASA Spaceflight team, I'm Thomas Burghardt. We'll see you next time.
We have liftoff. Propulsion continues to be nominal.
The chamber pressure looks good. Toggling up.
Roger, roll, Atlantic.
Water towers can fly! Yes!
Tango Delta nominal.
Flight down, feed off. Bring in, off.
Yikes. You bet. Okay. We don't need any more of these.